Welcome back to Writing Code, and I hope you're excited to write your very first line of CSS now. And we can actually write CSS in 3 different places. First, we can add a piece of CSS directly to an element by using the style attribute. Second, we can also use the style element right here in the HTML head. So again, in this part that is not visible, so that is basically not rendered here in the browser. And the third option, which is the one that we are going to use, is to write CSS in an external style sheet, so in an external file. And that is usually the very best option. And so again, that's what we are going to do. So first of all, let's actually create that file. So let's open our sidebar back up and then create a new file by clicking here on this icon, or just right click and then new file. And then typically we call this style.css, but any name would actually work here. Okay, but this is not enough, because if we wrote any styles here, then how would this index.html file actually know about these styles? So these files are not connected anyway. And so that's what we need to do next. So to connect this HTML file with a CSS file, we use the link element. So basically to link the files together. Then we specify the href attribute. And then here, all we need to do is to specify the name of the file. So the path to the file, which in this case is again in the same folder as the HTML file. And then we also need to specify this rel attribute here and set it to style sheet, so that the browser knows that it is a CSS file. Okay, give it a save, and we can close the sidebar now. And now let's go back here and actually let's write the CSS that we saw in the last lecture. So remember that we need to start any CSS rule with a selector. So let's say we want to select the h1 here. So this here is an h1 element, and so we can write the selector of h1, which is exactly the name of the element. And now we can add our styles here to this declaration block. So let's start with the easiest one, which is to change the font size. So to make it a little bit bigger. And let's set it to 42 pixels. So px, and then we need to end each line with a semicolon. So here we specified a size, or as we also call it in CSS, a length, using the pixel unit. So 42 pixels will be exactly 42 physical pixels of your screen. Now there are many other units in CSS that are a little bit more complex to use, and so in this crash course we will stick to the pixel unit. But anyway, let's give it a save now, and the text just got bigger. And if you didn't see this happening, so if the text didn't get bigger, then you might need to manually reload the page. So from time to time, that is necessary. Okay, so let's keep going. So what else can we do? Well, we can make the text uppercase. So let's write text transform. And then as soon as you write the colon, VS Code will give you all the options that are available. So basically all the different keywords that we can use for this property. And so here we want uppercase. And as always, you can just hit enter if you want to autocomplete the word. And there it is. So you see that each of these properties here can take many different values. This one, for example, needs a length. So in this case, that is this value here specified in pixels. And so the size of the text will be 24 or actually 42 pixels. And pixels is a unit that I'm sure you've heard about. So basically that's the most common way of measuring like a display. So this size will now be 42 pixels of the display. Then here in the case of text transform, we actually have this keyword. And another one that needs a keyword is text align. So here we can basically align the text to the left, to the right, to the center, for example. So now the text is nicely centered. Okay, and there are many more properties that we can use for text, and we will keep using them throughout the course. This is just like a very brief introduction into writing some CSS. So what else do we have on our page? So we have this H1, of course, and then we have this text here, so these paragraphs. So let's select the paragraphs, and remember that the element is called P. And so we can simply select P by writing P. Very simple. So let's again use a font size, let's say 20 pixels, save it, and the text just got a bit bigger. Another thing that we can do is to increase the line height, which is basically the space between different lines. And here we can say 1.4, which is basically 140% of the height of one of the lines. So that looks a little bit nicer. So that's another very common property. And another common one is the font family. So font family is basically the font that you choose. Now, when you choose a font, we usually can only choose the ones that are available on the user's computer. So for example, it's pretty likely that you have Arial or Arial, whatever it is called, installed on your computer. And so if we specify that font, then this is what the page will look like. However, that's usually not what we do. So usually we load some font from somewhere else, for example, Google Fonts, which is what we're going to do in the next lecture. So for now, we can use this sans serif keyword, which is a lot better than specifying one of these random fonts. Because if the user then uses a computer or some other device which doesn't have Arial installed, then they will not be able to see the page in the same way. Because, well, they simply don't have the font, right? And so sans serif is a good keyword in case we don't want to load any external fonts, but as I said, we will just do that in the next lecture. Okay, but moving on, let's also style this text right here. So this lecture here, this introduction to CSS, is all about styling just simple text. So very simple stuff. And remember that these categories, so these here, they are a span element, right? And we actually placed them inside the separate element so that we could style them separately. And so let's do that now, or at least start to do that. So we can select all of these, and then let's also make them uppercase. So text, transform, and then uppercase. And also let's decrease the font size a little bit here. Let's say to 14 pixels. All right, so that's looking a little bit nicer here. And finally, what I want to do, again, since we're styling text, is to remove these bullet points from these lists. So that's something that we basically always do when we use lists. So the list, remember, is called UL. And so we just say list style and set it to none. And so the bullet points are gone. Okay, and that's all I wanted to show you in this very first introduction to CSS. So let's take a quick break, and I see you in a minute.